For years, fans, critics, and even Hollywood insiders have whispered the same question: what truly happened to Johnny Depp, the man who once ruled the box office, inspired millions, and lived a life as mysterious as the characters he played? Now, at 61, Depp has finally broken his silence, and what he reveals confirms exactly what so many long suspected, but never dared to say aloud. Johnny Depp's life has always been a strange blend of brilliance and chaos. He was the rebel who refused to play by Hollywood's rules, the star who ran from fame even as it chased him, and the artist whose personal life became more captivating and more heartbreaking than any movie he ever made. For decades, he carried that weight alone, but today, he's pulling back the curtain in a way he never has before. In a rare, unfiltered confession, Depp admits that the last several years were darker than the public realized. The endless legal battles, the career-threatening accusations, the public scrutiny, and the emotional toll all left wounds that fame could never protect him from. And while the world debated his every move, Depp says he was fighting a very private war, one that pushed him to the edge. But here's the part no one expected. Johnny isn't sharing these truths for sympathy or redemption. He's sharing them because, for the first time in his life, he says he finally understands why everything spiraled the way it did. He finally recognizes the patterns, the mistakes, the pain he carried from childhood, and the people he allowed too close. And he admits that so much of what happened to him was exactly what many of his fans had suspected. That behind the eccentric charm and magnetic talent was a man quietly breaking. Now, at 61, Johnny Depp is ready to tell the real story, and it's more emotional, more shocking, and more revealing than anyone imagined. For most of his life, Johnny Depp was a man hidden behind layers of characters, eccentric habits, whispered rumors, and carefully guarded privacy. To the world, he was Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, the Mad Hatter, and 100 other unforgettable faces. But behind all of them lived one man, fragile, wounded, brilliant, and deeply misunderstood. And now, at 61, he is finally revealing the truth he spent decades trying to outrun. Johnny's story doesn't begin in Hollywood. It begins in a small Kentucky home filled with the kind of tension a child never forgets. From his earliest memories, he learned that silence was survival. His mother, Betty Sue, was unpredictable, loving one moment, explosive the next. His father was distant, worn down, and eventually walked out. Johnny often said the day his father left was the day his childhood ended. That abandonment carved a hole inside him he spent years trying to fill. As he grew older, he found escape in music first. Acting came later almost by accident, but it became the perfect disguise. When he played a role, he didn't have to be Johnny. He didn't have to feel the old wounds, the fear, or the emptiness. Each character was a mask, and each mask let him breathe a little easier. But the world loved the man behind the mask far more than he expected. 21 Jump Street turned him into a teen heartthrob practically overnight, a label he hated. Fame felt suffocating, not comforting. He didn't want to be adored. He wanted to disappear. And yet, disappearing only made Hollywood want him more. Behind the scenes, Johnny's emotional battles continued to grow. He carried old pain into adulthood, holding onto it like an anchor. He surrounded himself with people who didn't always have his best interests at heart. He poured himself into work because it was the only place he felt in control. And when the pressure grew unbearable, he turned to the only numbing agents he knew: alcohol, substances, and the chaos that came with them. What no one realized was how fragile he truly was. Beneath the swagger, behind the smoky voice and the laid-back charm, there was a man terrified of being hurt again. A man who trusted too easily. A man who let the wrong people into his life because he desperately wanted connection. For years, fans suspected that something deeper hid behind his eccentricity: the hats, the scarves, the quietness, the melancholy in his eyes. And now Johnny admits it. He was never playing a part. That was simply who he was. A man with a wounded past trying to navigate a world that demanded perfection. Fame didn't heal him. Wealth didn't save him. Awards didn't validate him. Instead, the more success he gained, the more loss he felt. Hollywood adored his talent, but ignored his humanity. And the more people criticized him, judged him, or twisted his story, the more he retreated, creating a world only a handful of people could enter. At 61, he finally says what he never could before. The real battle was always inside him. His deepest struggles weren't with studios, tabloids, or Hollywood politics. They were with the ghosts of his past, the childhood trauma, the heartbreak, the abandonment, the fear of never being enough. And as he reveals these truths now, fans realize he is not the tragic figure tabloids painted him to be. He is a survivor who spent a lifetime pretending he didn't hurt. This is the beginning of the story Johnny Depp never wanted to tell, but the one he finally needed to. The world saw Johnny Depp as a rebel, a genius, and a Hollywood enigma, but few understood the private battles he fought while the cameras weren't rolling. Between blockbusters, award shows, and interviews, he lived in a world filled with contradictions, immense adoration on one side, unbearable pressure on the other, and for decades, he carried it all alone. The early 1990s marked both his breakthrough and the beginning of a hidden spiral. After his role in Edward Scissorhands, critics hailed him as a visionary actor, and the public adored his offbeat charm. But with acclaim came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came self-doubt. The young man who had once escaped a turbulent childhood now faced a relentless spotlight that exposed every flaw, every eccentricity, and every misstep. Johnny's private coping mechanisms became increasingly necessary and increasingly dangerous. Alcohol, drugs, and the frenetic lifestyle of Hollywood became more than indulgences. They were shields, crutches, and sometimes even prisons. Friends from that era recall a man who could be brilliant one moment and broken the next, a person whose inner chaos contrasted sharply with the effortless charm the public adored. Marriage and relationships offered fleeting stability, but were often complicated by fame and his own unresolved pain. He loved deeply, yet he could not fully trust. He gave himself entirely to people, only to feel abandoned, misunderstood, or betrayed. Those heartbreaks left marks invisible to cameras, but indelible on his soul. Through it all, work was his sanctuary. Acting provided structure, purpose, and a temporary escape from the emotional turbulence he carried. Roles that seemed strange or eccentric were, in reality, mirrors for his own feelings, characters who were outsiders, misunderstood, or battling inner demons. Audiences laughed, cried, and marveled, never realizing that Johnny was performing therapy through art, exorcising the shadows of his past with every scene. The public perception of him as a carefree, eccentric star often clashed with the reality. He was terrified of failure, of losing the few people he trusted, and of confronting the childhood trauma he had spent a lifetime running from. Fame amplified those fears. Every headline, every rumor, every court case became more than a story. It became a reflection of his vulnerabilities laid bare for the world to dissect. Even as awards and accolades piled up, Johnny felt a gnawing emptiness. The world adored the characters he created, yet he wondered if anyone truly saw Johnny, the man beneath the layers. The more he succeeded professionally, the more personal battles loomed, and though he rarely spoke about it, the weight of decades of trauma, heartbreak, and isolation pressed down, shaping the man who would eventually decide to speak his truth. By the time he reached his late 50s, it was clear the life the public admired was only half the story. The other half, the years of struggle, secrecy, and pain, was what he had carried silently until now. And at 61, Johnny Depp is finally revealing it all. Unflinching, unmasked, and utterly human. By the time Johnny Depp reached his late 50s, the private battles he had waged for decades were no longer something he could ignore. Fame had given him the world, yet it had also isolated him. Every relationship, every friendship, and even his own sense of self had been tested by the pressures of being a public figure, whose every move was scrutinized. For years, Johnny carried it all silently, hiding his pain behind eccentric personas and the mask of the charismatic star everyone adored. The turning point came quietly, in a moment that would change how he viewed his life and legacy. After years of public scrutiny, legal battles, and tabloid speculation, Johnny realized that running, hiding, or pretending to be invulnerable no longer served him. He had built walls high enough to keep most people out, but in doing so, he had also kept himself isolated from genuine understanding and connection. It was during a reflective period, away from the flashing cameras and the noise of Hollywood, that he began confronting the layers of trauma he had long avoided. Childhood memories, unresolved grief, failed relationships, and betrayals he had internalized all surfaced, forcing him to face the man beneath the fame. For the first time, he acknowledged that the pain he had carried for decades was real and deserved to be confronted, not masked with humor, costumes, or performances. Friends who spent time with him during this period noticed a subtle but profound change. Johnny was no longer the man constantly on edge, consumed by the need to prove himself. He became more introspective, willing to explore the depths of his experiences rather than suppress them. He talked openly, for the first time in years, about what he had endured, the losses, the betrayals, the pressures that shaped his life, and in doing so, he began a form of self-liberation, a reclaiming of the narrative that had long been controlled by gossip, rumors, and tabloid speculation. This period was not without struggle. Facing decades of personal and professional turmoil was exhausting, emotionally draining, and often terrifying. But it also allowed him to see patterns, understand decisions he regretted, and recognize the resilience he had developed along the way. The eccentricity, the charm, the charisma, these were no longer masks hiding a wounded man. They were parts of a whole, a testament to his survival, creativity, and ability to endure. By the time Johnny turned 61, he was ready to speak, not for vindication, not for fame, and not for applause, but to share the truth. The world had speculated, judged, and created its own narratives for decades. Now, for the first time, Johnny presented the story as it really was: raw, honest, and profoundly human. He confirmed what many had suspected, that behind the headlines and the eccentric public persona was a man who had faced unimaginable trials and survived. The revelation was powerful, not because it was shocking, but because it was deeply relatable. Johnny's story was one of struggle, of resilience, and of the courage to confront oneself after a lifetime of evasion. It reminded fans that even the brightest stars are human, that fame does not immunize anyone against pain, and that survival often requires acknowledging one's deepest vulnerabilities. This was more than a confession. It was a reckoning, a turning point, and a declaration that Johnny Depp would no longer be defined solely by others' narratives. He had reclaimed his story, and in doing so, offered the world a glimpse of the man behind the legend. Complex, wounded, and remarkably resilient. At 61, Johnny Depp's decision to finally speak openly about his life was more than a revelation. It was an act of reclamation. For decades, the world had spun countless stories about him: the misunderstood genius, the eccentric star, the man undone by scandal. Headlines painted caricatures, and tabloid speculation often overshadowed the truth. But Johnny was determined that the narrative would no longer be dictated by others. This was his story, told in his own words, unfiltered and unflinching. The first ripple of impact came immediately. Fans responded with empathy and understanding. They recognized the honesty in his words, the vulnerability he had long shielded behind charm and humor. Social media erupted not with scandal, but with admiration for his courage. Viewers who had idolized his on-screen performances now saw the man behind the roles, a man who had endured immense pain and come out alive, perhaps even stronger than before. Revisiting his past publicly was not easy. Johnny spoke about the personal losses that shaped him, the betrayals that wounded him, and the moments of doubt that made him question everything he had built. He revealed the hidden costs of fame, the relationships strained by public scrutiny, the emotional exhaustion of living under constant judgment, and the internal battles no award or accolade could ease. The world had seen his resilience on screen, but now they understood the depth of resilience required just to navigate life off camera. Yet, this revelation was not a plea for sympathy. Johnny framed it as a testament to survival. He wanted people to understand that pain does not define the entirety of a life. Endurance, self-reflection, and the ability to rise after setbacks do. He admitted mistakes, acknowledged vulnerabilities, and embraced imperfections, offering a level of transparency rarely seen from someone of his stature. Professionally, the confession also marked a new chapter. Studios, collaborators, and fans alike began to see Johnny not just as a performer, but as an individual whose personal journey enriched his art. His roles took on renewed depth, informed by years of lived experience, emotional honesty, and self-awareness. It was as if the public recognition of his struggles allowed him to channel his pain into creativity, authenticity, and a renewed passion for storytelling. Privately, the impact was equally profound. Johnny reported a sense of liberation and emotional unburdening that had eluded him for decades. By acknowledging the trauma, heartbreak, and complexities of his past, he allowed himself to heal. Relationships that had been strained by silence and misunderstanding found reconciliation, and he cultivated a more intentional approach to the people he trusted and the experiences he embraced. Ultimately, Johnny Depp's revelation was a reminder of a universal truth. No matter the fame, talent, or success, human vulnerability cannot be hidden indefinitely. Speaking his truth didn't erase the pain of the past, but it transformed it, converting years of struggle into insight, wisdom, and connection. At 61, Johnny Depp confirmed what many suspected all along. Behind the eccentric charm and unforgettable performances was a man who had faced extraordinary personal trials, survived them, and emerged with clarity. He reclaimed his narrative not to rewrite the past, but to live fully in the present, a man defined not solely by scandal or rumor, but by resilience, courage, and the honesty to finally tell his story.